The fall of Troy. The night smelled of smoke and iron. From the high walls of Troy, the stars trembled like tears, veiled behind a sky bruised by the burning of 10 long years of war. The sea wind carried the cries of the dying and the clash of bronze upon bronze. Odysseus stood among the ruins, his face lit by the flames that devoured the city he had once besieged. His armor was dented, his sword dulled, his heart hollowed out by victory. Around him, the Greeks shouted in triumph, but in his eyes, there was no triumph, only a quiet exhaustion, like a man who had seen too much of both glory and grief. He thought of home, of Ithaca, of the cliffs rising over a calm blue sea, of Penelope's gentle hands weaving at her loom, of Telemachus, his son, whose first steps he had never seen. He whispered their names under his breath, as if the gods might carry them across the waves and remind them that he still lived. But the gods were listening in other ways. High upon Olympus, the immortals watched the fires below. Athena, the gray-eyed goddess of wisdom, saw her beloved mortal and smiled with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "He is clever," she said softly, "and his heart is strong, but the sea will test him more than war ever did." Poseidon, lord of the deep, scowled beneath his beard of foam. "He mocks the gods," he thundered. "He built the wooden horse and tricked the Trojans, and he gave no offering to the sea. Let him learn humility upon my waters." Thus began the journey home, the long wandering that would make Odysseus not only a warrior, but a legend. When dawn came, the Greeks set sail, their black ships cut through the waves, oars flashing like silver. The wind filled their sails, and the ruins of Troy fell behind them, shrinking into a haze of smoke. Odysseus stood at the prow, his eyes fixed on the horizon. His men laughed and sang, but he was silent. He could feel something stirring in the sea below, as if an ancient power had awakened. The gulls circled overhead, crying out warnings that no man could understand. For days they sailed under a golden sun. The sea was calm. The air smelled of salt and freedom. They dreamed of homecoming feasts, of wives and sons and warm hearths. But on the seventh day, the wind shifted. Clouds gathered. A strange stillness filled the air, heavy and waiting. Then, from the horizon, came a voice, a whisper like thunder, "Odysseus." The sailors froze. The sea beneath them darkened, and waves rose like living walls. Lightning split the sky, and rain lashed their faces. Odysseus held fast to the mast, shouting orders above the storm. But he knew this was no ordinary tempest. This was Poseidon's wrath. The storm raged through the night. Ships were torn apart, men swept into the deep. When morning came, Odysseus' fleet was scattered. Only one ship remained, battered and broken, drifting across an endless sea. He looked around at his surviving crew, faces pale, eyes wide with fear, and said quietly, "We live, therefore we must go on." For days they drifted, the sea vast and empty. Hunger gnawed at them, thirst cracked their lips. But at last, one morning, a soft light broke through the mist. Ahead lay a green shore, an island blooming with flowers, golden under the sun. The men cheered. Odysseus smiled, though wariness lingered in his gaze. "The gods give with one hand," he murmured, "and take with the other." They rowed toward the island, hearts full of hope, not knowing that temptation awaited them there, sweet and deadly. The island of the Lotus-Eaters. The sea calmed after days of fury. Morning rose like a pale flame, spilling gold across the waves. Odysseus stood at the stern of his ship, bare-armed, the wind tugging at his dark hair. The men were exhausted, hollow from hunger and salt. Their clothes were stiff with brine. Their eyes had forgotten sleep. Yet before them now, as the mist slowly drew aside, an island appeared, green as an emerald, soft with drifting clouds of fragrance. The rowers stared. They had seen coasts black with volcanic rock, shores of bone and ruin, but this place breathed peace. Trees leaned toward the sea as if to welcome them, their branches heavy with unknown fruit. The air itself seemed to hum with a sweetness that wrapped the heart in calm. Odysseus hesitated. Too beautiful, he thought. The sea does not give gifts without reason. But his men murmured, "A place to rest, Captain. A place to fill our jars and forget the storm." He nodded slowly. "We shall land. But remember, no man eats or drinks until I give word." The ship slid into a quiet bay. The sand was pale, the water clear enough to see silver fish drifting like fallen stars beneath the keel. They stepped ashore. For a moment they simply stood, breathing the scent of the island, honey, flowers, something else they could not name. Birds sang in the distance, slow and languid. Somewhere a river whispered through tall reeds. The men spread out, searching for fruit and fresh water. Odysseus climbed a low hill, scanning the land. He saw no houses, no smoke, no human life. Only groves of trees and the strange stillness of afternoon heat. Then he saw them, figures moving among the flowers, tall, graceful, their skin the color of sunlight through leaves. They carried baskets woven of vines, filled with pale blossoms. As they came closer, Odysseus saw that they were smiling soft, dreamlike smiles, as if they had forgotten sorrow long ago. One of them bowed. "Welcome, traveler," she said, her voice like the hush before evening rain. "You have come to the land of peace. Eat of our lotus, and your heart shall find rest." Odysseus's men reached for the flowers before he could stop them. The petals shimmered with dew. They ate, and at once their eyes changed. The worry faded from their faces. They laughed softly, sat down in the grass, and began to sing songs that had no words. "Come, Captain," said the woman, holding out a blossom white as the moon. "Taste, and be free from the burden of remembering." Odysseus felt the perfume drift toward him, sweet, heavy, almost holy. For an instant, he saw in his mind his wife's face. Then it wavered, replaced by the vision of a quiet shore where no war, no sea, no pain could reach him. "How easy," whispered a voice inside him. "How good it would be to rest, to forget the road, the gods, the storm." But then he heard another voice, the cry of a child in memory, his son calling from the halls of Ithaca. "Father, where are you?" He flung the flower away. "No," he shouted, and the spell trembled in the air. "We are men of Ithaca, not ghosts of forgetfulness." He ran to his crew. Some were lying on the grass, their faces serene, their hands reaching for more lotus. He dragged them up one by one, shaking them, shouting their names. "Eurylochus, Perimedes, wake! They murmured, smiling faintly, "Why leave, Odysseus? The sea is cruel. Here there is no death." But he struck the sand beside them with his sword. "There is no life without memory," he said, "and I will not let you be lost while breath remains in me." With the help of a few who still resisted the spell, he carried the others back to the ship. They struggled, begged to return, but he bound them fast with ropes. As the oars bit into the water and the island drifted away behind them, those who had eaten the lotus wept like children torn from home. The lotus maidens stood on the shore watching. They did not curse or call. They only smiled and waved their hands, and soon even the outline of the island faded into mist, as if it had never been. Night came. The men slept uneasily. Odysseus sat awake at the prow, eyes fixed on the dark line of the horizon. The sea murmured beneath him, and he spoke softly into the wind. "O gods who rule the deep, let my heart never forget. Let pain remain if it must, but keep my memory alive." And the sea seemed to whisper back, "Remember, O the Cyclops and the witch Circe." The moon had risen pale and cold above the endless sea. The men, weary from the strange peace of the Lotus Island, rowed in silence. For many nights the waves seemed empty of life, the stars their only companions. But on the seventh night the smell of smoke and sheep reached them across the wind, and Odysseus saw cliffs rising from the sea, dark, jagged, streaked with caves. He ordered the sail lowered and the oars muffled. "Another shore," he said. "The gods give us no rest, yet perhaps we shall find food and fire." They landed at dawn. The island was harsh and bare, but a valley opened between the cliffs where green fields shimmered and sheep grazed in thousands. The bleating of lambs echoed from the rocks. No shepherd appeared. Odysseus took 12 men and left the rest to guard the ship. "We'll go up the valley," he said. "If men live here, we'll ask for gifts as travelers do under the law of Zeus, protector of guests." They walked until the sun stood high. Then they saw a cavern mouth larger than any hall of men, its threshold strewn with giant logs. Within stood pens for lambs and kids, jars of milk, racks of cheese. "The master of this place is wealthy," muttered one of the crew. "Let us take what we need and go." Odysseus shook his head. "I would see what manner of host he is. The law of the gods forbids theft from one who may offer freely." So they waited. The shadows lengthened. The ground began to tremble. From far down the valley came the thudding of vast feet. A shape blotted the sun, a giant taller than the tallest mast. He bore a load of wood upon his shoulder as easily as a man carries twigs. When he entered the cave, the Greeks shrank back behind a jar. He dropped the timber, closed the entrance with a slab of stone that 20 oxen could not move, and began to milk his ewes. Only then did he notice them. His single eye, round and gray as a storm cloud, widened. "Strangers," he rumbled. Odysseus stepped forward, heart hammering but voice steady. "We are men of Achaea, blown from Troy by storm. We seek shelter and a gift of friendship, as is the right of travelers under Zeus." The giant laughed, a sound like rocks grinding in an avalanche. "We Cyclopes care nothing for Zeus. We are stronger than your gods. But I'll give you a gift indeed. A quick end and a meal for my supper." He seized 2 men, dashed them against the wall, and ate them raw. The others cried out, but Odysseus raised his hand. "Hold fast. Anger will not move the stone." They spent the night in terror, hearing the bones crack between the monster's teeth. At dawn, the Cyclops drove his flock outside, rolling the stone aside and replacing it when he returned. Odysseus' mind raced. "He cannot see but through that eye," he thought. "We must strike there." When evening came, Odysseus offered him a bowl of dark wine saved from the ships. "Drink, mighty one. No man has ever tasted such sweetness." The Cyclops drank, belched, and smiled drunkenly. "Your name, little man? Tell me so I may bless you before I eat you last." "My name," said Odysseus, "is Nobody." The giant laughed until the cave shook. "Then nobody shall I eat last. That is my gift." He drank again and sleep dragged him down. Odysseus and his men heated the end of a great olive stake in the fire until it glowed red. Together they drove it into the Cyclops' eye. The monster roared, blood and smoke pouring forth. He tore the stake out and bellowed to the other Cyclopes who lived in distant caves. "Friends, help! Nobody is killing me," they shouted back. "If nobody harms you, then your pain comes from Zeus. Pray to your father Poseidon." And they went away. Through the night, the blinded giant groped for them. At dawn, he rolled the stone aside to let his flock out, feeling each sheep's back as it passed. Odysseus tied his men beneath the thick-fleeced rams and clung himself to the belly of the largest. Thus they escaped. Into the morning light, when they reached the ship, the men rowed furiously. Odysseus' pride burned too bright. He stood at the stern and shouted across the waves, "Cyclops, if any ask who blinded you, tell them it was Odysseus of Ithaca." A terrible silence fell. Then came the voice of the giant, trembling and filled with rage. "Hear me, Poseidon, god of the sea. Grant that Odysseus never reach his home. Or if fate ordains he must, let him come late, alone and in sorrow." The sea darkened. The waves rose as though in answer. Days later, driven by new storms, they reached another island, green and fragrant. This was a home of the witch Circe, who sang to the beasts of her forest. Odysseus sent half his men inland to seek food. They found a shining palace where wolves and lions lay at her feet, gentle as dogs. She welcomed them with honeyed words and a golden cup. When they drank, they forgot their speech. Their bodies shrank and twisted. Where men had stood, now snorted pigs. Circe laughed softly and drove them to the sty. Only Eurylochus fled and returned to the ship, trembling. "All are lost," he said. "The woman is a sorceress." Odysseus armed himself at once. "I will bring them back or share their fate." On his path through the forest, a figure appeared, a young man of shining grace. It was Hermes, messenger of the gods. He held out a black root and said, "This herb moly will guard you from her spell. When she offers drink, draw your sword and make her swear no harm." Odysseus thanked him and went on. Circe greeted him, fair and smiling. "Drink, wanderer." He took the cup, pretending to sip, but when she lifted her wand, he drew his blade. "Undo your spell, O daughter of Helios, or you shall learn the edge of mortal steel." Circe gasped, then laughed in wonder. "No man has ever withstood me. You must be Odysseus, whose name even the gods speak." She touched his hand. Fear not, your friends shall be men again, and my home shall be your refuge. She kept her word. The swine became men once more, though their eyes held the memory of the sty. Circe bathed them, fed them, clothed them in soft tunics. For a year they lived in her halls, forgetting the sea, the war, the pain of journeying. Yet one morning Odysseus stood upon the shore and watched the gulls wheel above the waves. His heart ached. Circe came beside him. Still you long for home. Ithaca waits, he said. Penelope waits. My son is grown and does not know my face. She sighed. Then you must descend to the house of the dead and seek the blind prophet Tiresias. Only he can tell you the road that leads again to the living world. Her hand brushed his cheek like wind through reeds. Go, but remember me kindly. Thus the hero left the island of enchantment, his men silent, their hearts heavy with the memory of Circe's kindness and her warning. Ahead lay the land where no sun shines, where the shades of the dead whisper in the dark. The descent to the underworld. The sea changed color as they sailed from Circe's isle. Daylight dimmed. The water beneath the keel turned thick and heavy, green giving way to gray, then black. No gulls followed them now, no dolphins flashed beside the ship. The air grew still, and even the sound of oars seemed to fade into the vast silence that lies between worlds. Odysseus stood at the prow. His men watched him uncertain, for the goddess's last words still echoed in their minds. You must go down among the dead and speak with him who no longer breathes. They had seen many strange lands, but this command chilled them more than the Cyclops' roar or the thunder of Poseidon's storms. When at last a dim glow rose ahead, neither dawn nor sunset but the ghost of both, Odysseus knew they had reached the end of the living sea. There the river of ocean meets the misty shores where mortal eyes are dim. The wind smelled of cold iron and wet earth. He ordered the ship drawn onto the strand. The men built an altar of stones, and Odysseus poured offerings as Circe had taught. Milk and honey for the dead, sweet wine for the shadow of life, water for the peace that follows all. Over it he sprinkled barley and drew his sword. Stand back, he told the crew. No living man may touch this blood. He slit the throats of black rams, and their dark life ran into the pit. The air shivered. From the gray horizon came whispering voices, thin as wind through reeds. The first shades appeared, pale figures drifting out of the fog, eyes like smoke. They pressed forward, silent, hungry for warmth and memory. Odysseus gripped his blade. Back, I seek Tiresias, the prophet of Thebes. But the spirits crowded close, faces he half remembered from battlefields and dreams. A boy he had known in childhood, a comrade fallen at Troy. At last, a woman's shape rising slowly, her hands outstretched. He froze. Mother, he whispered. Anticlea smiled faintly, the light of recognition trembling across her features. My son, I died of longing for you. Why have you come where the living do not walk? Tears burned his eyes. Because the gods will not let me find my way home. Tell me, does Penelope still wait? She waits, said the shade. Weaving by day, unraveling by night, your son grows strong, but the suitors waste your halls. Hasten home, Odysseus. Your name is fading from their tongues. He tried to embrace her, but his arms closed on mist. 3 times he reached, 3 times she drifted back, like smoke rising from ashes. "Do not grieve," she whispered. "Even in death, a mother's love endures." Then she was gone. Another form approached, taller, crowned with fillets of prophecy. Tiresias the blind seer lifted a cup of the sacrificed blood and drank. His sightless sockets gleamed with borrowed fire. "Odysseus, son of Laertes," he said, "why have you come, weary of war and storm?" "You know the answer, seer," Odysseus replied. "Tell me how I may appease the god who hunts me and reach my home again." Tiresias' voice was like wind over stone. "Poseidon's anger will follow you until you learn restraint. Yet you may reach Ithaca if your heart stays steadfast and your hands refrain from harm. Beware the island of the sun, where his sacred cattle graze. If your men touch them, destruction waits. When at last you stand upon your shore, take an oar upon your shoulder and walk inland until men mistake it for a winnowing fan. Then plant it in the earth and sacrifice to Poseidon. Only then shall the sea forgive." He paused, listening to the murmurs of countless shades. "And when age and peace have come, death shall take you from the sea gentle as sleep. That is the fate of Odysseus." The prophet sank back into shadow. Other spirits came then, heroes of Troy, their armor dim, their eyes remembering fire. Achilles strode forward, proud even in death. Odysseus bowed. "You are honored among men, Achilles. Surely death cannot diminish such glory." The ghost's mouth twisted in sorrow. "Better to be the poorest farmer alive than king of all these shadows. Remember that when pride tempts you." His voice faded into the echoing dark. Then appeared Agamemnon, the high king, bearing the look of a man who has known betrayal. "My wife and her lover struck me down at my own feast," he said. "Trust not every heart that smiles, Odysseus." And last came Ajax, tall and silent, still angry from the quarrel over Achilles' arms. Odysseus spoke softly, but Ajax turned away without reply and melted into the gloom. At length the tide of shades receded. The edge of dawn glimmered weakly through the fog. Odysseus felt his strength return, heavy with the weight of prophecy and loss. He signaled his men, "Back to the ship. We have what we came for." They rowed in silence through waters that no longer shone. Behind them the land of the dead sank beneath the mist, leaving only the faint cry of unseen birds. For a long time none spoke. Then Eurylochus said, "Captain, we have looked upon the faces of the dead. Can any man live unchanged after that?" Odysseus watched the east grow lighter. "We live," he answered, "and therefore we must remember." The sun broke free of the horizon, turning the sea to gold. Ahead waited new dangers, the Sirens, whose voices lure the heart, and beyond them the twin horrors that guard the strait. Yet for a little while there was peace. The sound of oars, the warmth of light returning to men who had seen the dark. The song of the Sirens. The morning after they left the shores of the dead, the sea was as smooth as hammered bronze. No wind stirred the sails. The oars dipped and rose, dipping and rising again, each stroke echoing against the wide silence. Odysseus stood at the tiller, the sun behind him casting his shadow long across the deck. The air was heavy, waiting, like the pause before a voice begins to sing. They had been warned by Circe before they ever left her island. When the wind carries you near the coast of the Sirens, take care, for there is no man alive who has heard their song and seen his home again. They sit among meadows of flowers, but bones whiten the ground around them. The men remembered. They whispered her words to each other now, glancing toward the empty horizon. For half a day they sailed through quiet waters, and in that silence, the world seemed to hold its breath. Even the seabirds had gone elsewhere. Then the air changed. A faint sweetness drifted toward them, something like the scent of spring blossoms mixed with the salt of the sea. Eurylochus was the first to notice. "Captain, do you smell it?" Odysseus lifted his head. The breeze was cool, but beneath it lay that perfume, subtle yet alive, tugging softly at the mind. He knew at once where they were. "Row steady," he said. "No man must lose his wits now. Bring me the wax Circe gave us." They melted the beeswax over the fire until it softened like butter. Odysseus shaped it carefully between his palms, pressing it into the ears of each sailor until the sound of the world dulled for them to silence. Then he took a long rope of oxhide and said, "Now lash me to the mast. Tight. If I command you to release me, tighten the knots more. No matter what I say." The men obeyed, their eyes uneasy. They could hear nothing now but the creak of the timbers and the wash of the oars. Odysseus alone kept his ears free. For a time, there was only the rhythm of the sea. Then, from somewhere ahead, a voice began. A single note, pure and high, that shimmered through the air like sunlight on glass. It drifted across the waves, soft as breath at first, then multiplied, rising and weaving into harmony so beautiful that the heart ached to follow it. Odysseus gasped. The sound filled him, surrounded him. It was not only music, it was memory. The sirens sang of home. They sang of Ithaca's hills, golden with olive trees, of Penelope's quiet laughter as she wove at her loom, of Telemachus running through the courtyard with the first light of morning. They sang of victories and feasts long past, of the roar of the crowd when his name was shouted among heroes. They sang of rest, of an end to wandering, of peace. "Turn the ship," he shouted, struggling against the ropes. "I must go to them. Let me go, men of Ithaca. That is my wife calling." But his crew rowed on, deaf to his cries. Sweat gleamed on their arms as they pulled together, eyes fixed on the horizon. The siren's song grew louder, more urgent. "Odysseus, come closer. We know you. We have sung for kings and gods, but none like you. Come ashore and learn all that was and is and shall be. The sea will rest. The storm will end." He strained against the cords until they cut into his skin. His heart pounded with longing. His eyes filled with tears of beauty and despair. For a moment he thought he saw them, figures on a sunlit shore, their hair shining like gold, their lips curved in smiles that promised truth and love and all the secrets of the world. Then the ship passed beyond the sound. The song faded as though it were being drawn into the wind. The scent of flowers vanished, replaced by the clean salt of open sea. Odysseus slumped against the mast, trembling. The men turned their heads, uncertain, as he signaled them to pull the wax from their ears. They saw his face, drawn, pale, yet shining with something beyond words. "Row faster," he whispered hoarsely. "Faster, before their song returns to me in dreams." The men obeyed, though none could hear what haunted their captain's mind. The sea opened wide again, blue and endless, and behind them the island of the Sirens sank into the haze. For hours he said nothing. Only when the sun began to lower did he speak. There are voices in the world that promise truth but mean to take the soul instead, he said softly. Remember that, my friends. Not all beauty is mercy. They nodded, though they did not understand. Odysseus watched the horizon, where dark shapes now waited. The cliffs of two monsters whose names sailors whispered with dread. The wind grew colder as evening came on. The smell of pitch and rope filled the air. Circe had spoken of this too. The narrow strait where Scylla and Charybdis kept watch. On one side, she had warned, the cliffs hide Scylla, six-headed, swift and ravenous. On the other lies Charybdis, a whirlpool that swallows the sea itself. Hug the cliff of Scylla. Better to lose a few than all. Odysseus remembered. Yet memory did little to ease the dread tightening in his chest. He ordered the oarsmen to steady their hands. Keep close to the rock. Whatever happens, row on. The strait narrowed around them. Foam hissed against black stone. From the left came a roar like thunder, Charybdis drawing in the sea. The ship shuddered as the current pulled, but they fought it with desperate strokes. Then from above came another sound, a cry that pierced the soul. Odysseus looked up, and there she was, Scylla, 6 long necks snaking from the cliffside, each ending in a head with eyes like burning coals and jaws full of fangs. Her scream echoed between the rocks, half wind, half beast. Before Odysseus could shout a warning, she struck, swift as lightning. 6 men lifted into the air, their arms flailing, their voices calling their captain's name as the monster dragged them upward into the dark. Their cries were short, ending in silence. Odysseus covered his face. He had not told them what awaited. He could not bear for them to die in fear. Yet the sound of their final cries would haunt him longer than the siren's song. When they were past the strait, the sea widened once more. The men sat motionless, trembling, staring at the empty benches where their companions had rowed moments before. Odysseus spoke quietly. They are gone, but they have bought us life. Honor them by keeping to your oars. No one answered. The only sound was the hiss of waves along the hull. Night fell like a curtain. The stars came out, cold and infinite. Odysseus lay awake on the deck, staring upward, hearing the sea breathe beneath him. He thought of the Sirens and their promises. He thought of the 6 lost men. He thought of home, so close in dream yet still far beyond the world's edge. Soft instrumental swell, wind and harp again, fading into a calm heartbeat rhythm. Thus ended the trial of the Sirens and the passage of the twin terrors. Yet fate was not finished with the wanderer of Ithaca. For ahead waited an island bright as a coin under the sun, an island of temptation and doom. At last he nodded. We will anchor near the shore, he said. But you will swear upon your lives, that not one beast of Helios will be touched. We will live on what the ship still carries, or what fish the sea grants. The men raised their hands, swore the oath, and kissed the salt-stiff rope of the mast. They beached the ship in a sheltered cove where the sand shone like powdered gold. The air smelled of grass and wild thyme. Streams ran clear from the hills. The men drank deeply, laughing for the first time in many days. then built small shelters from driftwood and sailcloth. That night they feasted on fish and seabirds, and though they tried to sleep, strange dreams troubled them. The sound of a distant harp, the feeling of eyes watching from the sky. For a month the wind did not change. Day after day the breeze blew from the east, holding them captive. Their supplies ran low. Fish grew scarce, and the men's strength began to fade. Each dawn they looked toward the herds of shining cattle that grazed unguarded across the meadow. Their hides glowed faintly in the sunlight, their horns tipped with flame. No mortal herd ever looked so perfect. They belonged to a god, and every man knew it. Odysseus spent his days praying to the gods for wind, his nights keeping watch alone. He feared the hunger in his men's eyes more than any storm. Yet hunger is a god of its own, slow, cruel, relentless. One morning, after a night of cold rain, Odysseus climbed a ridge to scan the sea for change. Finding none, he lay beneath a rock and fell into troubled sleep. That was when Eurylochus gathered the men together beside the dying fire. "Brothers," he whispered, "we are dying by inches. Would you rather perish of hunger than take the gifts before you? I would rather drown once than waste away. If the sun is angered, let the god take me first. But perhaps he will forgive us, seeing that we only sought to live." The others looked at one another, torn between fear and need. Then one man rose, then another. They moved quietly to the meadow, the sound of rain covering their footsteps. When the first blade struck, lightning flashed without thunder. The cattle did not run. They stood still, their eyes wide, as if they knew the end had been spoken. The men worked quickly, cutting meat, kindling fire. The smell of roasting flesh drifted across the island, thick and sweet. Even the sea seemed to shudder. When Odysseus awoke, the wind had died completely. The world was too still. Then he smelled it, the smoke, the fat crackling on flame. He ran down the hill shouting, but it was done. The men turned toward him, faces pale with guilt and grease, and not one dared meet his eyes. He struck the sand with his fists. "You fools," he cried. "You've doomed us all." Helios sees this. He sees everything. As if in answer, the sky darkened. Clouds rolled from every side, swallowing the sun. Thunder boomed. The sea turned black. The men scrambled to the ship in terror, dragging what food they could. But Odysseus would not let them take the meat aboard. "Throw it away," he shouted. "The god's curse is on it." They obeyed, but it was too late. For 6 days they drifted in calm, no wind, no current. Then, on the 7th, the heavens opened. A storm unlike any before roared across the water. The sea heaved like a living thing. Masts snapped. Lightning danced across the waves. From above came a voice, deep and terrible, the voice of Helios himself. "Zeus, father of gods, behold your servant wronged. My cattle are slain by mortal hands. If they do not pay, let the sea swallow them all." And Zeus answered. The sky split open, and a bolt of fire struck the ship. The mast shattered. Flames leapt up, whipped by the wind. The men screamed as the sea engulfed them. One by one they vanished into the dark, their cries lost beneath the thunder. He floated on the fragments of his ship, numb with grief. The sun rose, cold, silent, unforgiving. Its light fell on the water, and he felt the gaze of the gods still upon him, burning without mercy. He bowed his head. "Lord Helios," he whispered hoarsely, "they paid with their lives. Spare me if the fates still will it." The waves carried him on, away from Thrinacia, away from the smoke of ruin, toward a horizon empty and endless. Soft instrumental interlude, low harp and wind. Days passed. He reached the edge of the sea where cliffs rose sheer from the foam. There, the remnants of his raft broke apart, and he was cast ashore on the island of Calypso, the immortal nymph who would love him and keep him prisoner for 7 long years. But that is another chapter. The island of Calypso, the years of stillness. When the sea at last released him, it was not to death but to a quiet shore where time itself seemed to rest. The waves rolled in slow as breathing, and the sand was pale as sleep. Vines of green climbed the rocks, heavy with flowers whose scent filled the air like music. This was Ogygia, the island where no mortal tide reached, where dawn arrived softly and never fully left. Odysseus lay half buried in sand, his face turned toward the sky. The sea's roar faded to a sigh. When he opened his eyes, he saw a shadow bend over him, hair falling like sunlight through leaves. Calypso, daughter of Atlas, looked upon him with wonder. She touched his brow, and the wounds of the storm eased beneath her fingers. "Who are you, stranger?" she asked. "Who drifts between life and death?" Odysseus tried to speak, but only salt water came. Calypso lifted him, carried him through forests where the air shimmered like gold dust. Her dwelling was a hollow of living rock, its walls veined with crystal, its floor cool with moss. Around it grew cedar and cypress, and from a hidden spring flowed water sweet as memory. For many days he lay in silence while Calypso tended him. The songs of her island filled his sleep, birds with silver throats, breezes that carried the hum of unseen harps. At last he rose, clothed in woven linen, and walked beside her along the shore. There was peace here, and beauty unending, but both felt heavy to him, like a cloak too fine to bear. Calypso watched him often from afar. She saw how his eyes turned always toward the horizon, toward the place where the world curved into distance. She spoke gently, yet her voice carried the depth of the sea. "Why do you grieve when paradise lies before you? The gods have sent you here to rest. Forget the war, the storms, the sorrow. I can make you immortal. Stay, and no tide shall ever part us." He looked upon her, her eyes bright as dawn, her face unmarred by time, and felt the pull of her words like gravity. Yet in his heart another face stirred. Penelope, her hands weaving, her gaze steady and patient beneath the same sun. He bowed his head. "You offer me eternity," he said, "but my soul was woven for one mortal shore. My heart is bound to Ithaca. Even in dream, I would see her hills." Calypso turned away, her hair trembling with the wind. "Cruel are the fates," she murmured. "They give to men the hunger of the sea and call it courage." Still, she loved him. For 7 years she kept him, half willing, half resigned. Together they walked the silent beaches, watched stars bloom above the water, spoke of distant things. But each dawn he climbed the cliffs and looked outward, counting the waves between him and home. The gods watched as well. On Olympus, Athena spoke before Zeus. "Father of heaven, have you not yet pitied the man of many sorrows? Long he has wandered, long he has suffered. Shall he die forgotten upon a lonely isle, while his wife wastes in tears and his son faces ruin? And Zeus, the cloud-gatherer, inclined his head. So let it be ended. Send Hermes swift of wing. Tell Calypso that her guest must sail again. So it was that one golden noon, while the cicadas droned among the olives, Hermes came gliding down from the heights of the air, his staff gleaming, his sandals flashing. He found Calypso weaving by her hearth, her song light yet filled with yearning. She saw the messenger and her smile faltered. Why come you here, son of Maya? The gods seldom visit me but to take away what little joy I find. Hermes spoke kindly, but the words carried the weight of Olympus. Zeus commands that you release Odysseus. His destiny lies upon the sea. You may not hinder it. Calypso's eyes darkened with grief. Always the gods envy what is free of their thrones. Yet I will obey. That evening, she went to Odysseus where he sat upon the rocks watching the waves break in slow fire. Her face was calm, but her voice trembled like the wind through reeds. Your wish is granted, she said. The gods permit you home. I will not keep you, though my heart would. Come, let us build your vessel. They worked together for days, cutting timbers, shaping planks, binding them with pitch and cord. Calypso brought cloth for sails, food, and skins of water. She taught him the constellations that would guide his course. Orion, the Great Bear, the star that never sets. When all was ready, the sky turned amber with farewell. Calypso stood by the water's edge, her hair blown by the sea breeze, and placed her hand upon his. Remember me kindly, she said, and tell your wife that even immortals may love in vain. Odysseus bowed his head. You gave me life when the sea took all else. I will remember. He pushed off from the shore, and the tide caught his raft. Calypso watched until he was a shadow against the glittering horizon, until even that shadow sank into the fold of distance. Then she turned and walked back into her island of stillness, singing softly to the empty air. The voyage to Ithaca, tempests, memory, and the shoreline of dreams. For 17 days the sea was kind. Odysseus steered by the stars, the planks of his raft creaking softly beneath his feet. The world was vast and blue, the horizon so wide that sky and water seemed one endless mirror. He ate little, drank from the skins Calypso had given him, and slept in brief moments when the wind was gentle. He was alone now, but in that solitude there was a kind of purity, the silence of truth, the quiet of a heart that knows its course. Each night he looked upward and found the guiding star that Calypso had shown him, bright and steadfast over his left shoulder. It seemed a promise from the gods, a reminder that somewhere beyond the rim of the world lay Ithaca, waiting. Yet the sea is never faithful for long. On the 18th day, the horizon darkened. The wind changed its voice, first a whisper, then a growl, then the deep, unending roar of a god awakening. Odysseus felt the hair rise on his arms before he even saw the waves swelling. He knew the hand behind them, Poseidon. The god of the sea had been far in the east among the Ethiopians, feasting with distant men. But now he had returned and seen the mortal drifting free. So, the gods have pitted him again, Poseidon thundered. Let us see if his raft can bear the storm of my heart. The sky split open. Clouds rolled like black mountains. The sea heaved and struck. Odysseus clung to the mast as the first wave tore across his deck, snapping ropes, hurling water over him until the world became only foam and wind and salt. Lightning flared. The raft shuddered, then cracked in two. He was thrown into the water, swallowed by it, turned and broken like driftwood in a god's hand. He rose gasping, clutching a single plank, eyes blinded by spray. "Mercy, Lord of the deep!" he shouted, though the wind devoured his voice. "I have paid your anger in full. What more would you have?" The sea answered only with thunder. Yet above the storm another presence stirred, a glimmer of light, soft and kind. Out of the foam rose a shape of silver, a woman's form crowned with seaweed and pearl. Enoleucothea, once mortal, now a spirit of the waves, drifted toward him, her voice calm amid the chaos. "Poor wanderer," she said, "even the sea must weary of your struggle. Take this veil, and when the storm has passed, cast it back to me. It will keep you from the depths." She placed a shimmering veil around his chest. At once the water lifted him, the weight of the waves easing. He clung to the plank, the veil glowing faintly beneath his hands, and let the storm carry him where it would. For 2 nights he drifted, half conscious, the heavens wheeling above like torn sails. When at last dawn broke, the sea was calmer, though his body trembled with exhaustion. He saw land, green cliffs rising from the water, trees waving high above. He tried to cry out, but his throat was dry. A final wave hurled him toward the rocks. He struck, slid beneath the foam, then found his footing on a ledge and dragged himself upward. The surf pounded behind him like the heart of the world. He lay upon the sand, his skin burned by salt, his lips cracked. The veil slipped from his chest, and he threw it back into the tide, whispering his thanks to the sea nymph. Then he crawled into a hollow beneath the olive trees, covered himself with leaves, and fell into the black sleep of the nearly dead. When he awoke, birds were calling softly above him, and the air smelled of wildflowers. Sunlight drifted through the branches, dappling his face. For the first time in many years, he felt peace not given by gods but by the earth itself. He rose slowly and made his way inland. The land was lush and gentle, with fields of grain swaying in the breeze and hills that caught the light like gold. From afar came the sound of laughter, of women washing clothes in a stream. The sound startled him. It had been so long since he had heard laughter without malice. He crept closer and saw them. Young women in bright robes, their hair loose, playing by the water. Among them was one whose beauty shone even above the rest, her bearing noble, her eyes curious and kind. She was Nausicaa, daughter of King Alcinous of the Phaeacians. When Odysseus stepped from the trees, they gasped and scattered, thinking him some wild creature. But Nausicaa stood her ground. Though his body was thin, his face scarred and weathered, there was something in his gaze, wisdom, courage, the fire of long endurance. He bowed before her. "Princess, I am a wanderer of many years. I ask only for water and a cloth to cover myself, that I may stand once more among men." Nausicaa looked upon him and saw both the hero he had been and the broken traveler he had become. "You have suffered much," she said softly. "My father's hall is open to you. Follow our path, and you will find shelter." She called her maids back, and they brought him oil and garments, food and drink. As he washed in the river, the water seemed to wash away years of sorrow. When he looked at his reflection, he saw not the lost man of the sea, but the king who had once led men to Troy. That evening, Nausicaa guided him to the palace of her father. The halls of the Phaeacians gleamed with bronze and marble, the air rich with music and the scent of fruit. King Alcinous welcomed him with honor, though he knew not his name. "You have come from the sea," the king said. "Here all wanderers find rest. Eat, speak, and tell us who you are." So Odysseus told his story of Troy, of the Cyclops, of the Sirens, of the dead and the storms. His words filled the hall, and as he spoke, even the musicians laid down their lyres to listen. When he ended, there was silence, then applause like the rush of waves against shore. Alcinous rose. "You shall not wander any longer. Tomorrow our ships will bear you home." That night, Odysseus lay upon a soft couch, the first true bed he had known since the war. Through the open window, he saw stars burning quietly above the sea. He thought of Penelope, her eyes watching the same constellations across 1,000 miles of ocean. The wind through the trees outside whispered like her voice in dreams. At dawn, the Phaeacians led him to the shore. Their ship was swift and silent, shaped like the crescent moon. They placed gifts beside him, gold, cloth, and fine wine, and raised their hands in blessing. As the vessel glided from the harbor, Odysseus felt tears rise unbidden. The oars dipped in rhythm, the sails caught the morning wind, and sleep came upon him. Not the heavy sleep of exhaustion, but the deep, tender sleep of a man returning at last toward the place of his heart. Soft music fades in, harp and sea wind. The gods watched and Athena smiled. "At last," she said, "the tide runs homeward," and the ship sailed on through starlight, carrying the weary king back to the island of his birth. Homecoming, the bow, the queen, and the dawn of peace. Soft wind, waves hush against the shore. The first light of morning touches the sea. The ship glided over calm water, swift and silent. Odysseus lay beneath the sail, wrapped in a cloak of purple wool. Sleep held him gently, not the stormed sleep of the lost, but a deep and healing stillness, as if the gods themselves had cupped him in their hands. When dawn came, the sailors saw land ahead, a rugged line of cliffs, the slopes of olive trees, and a white strand of sand gleaming like bone. One man pointed and whispered, "Ithaca." The name drifted across the deck like incense. The captain smiled and said, "Let him rest. He has earned his dreams." So they lifted Odysseus from the ship, carried him ashore, and laid him upon the sand beside the still waters. The gifts of the Phaeacians they placed around him in silence, bronze and gold and soft woven cloth. Then, without a sound, they turned their ship and vanished into the mists of dawn, returning to their own world. When Odysseus stirred, the sea was quiet. He opened his eyes to the pale sky and felt the cool earth beneath his fingers. The air smelled of thyme and salt, and the cry of a gull came from the cliffs above. He sat up slowly, his heart trembling, for though 20 years had passed, he knew this land. The curve of the bay, the shape of the rocks, the silver leaves of the olive trees, this was Ithaca. He knelt and pressed his forehead to the ground. "O land of my fathers," he whispered, "I have come home." Yet the island was not as it had been. The paths were overgrown, the walls broken by time. He did not yet know who ruled, or what had become of his hall, or if Penelope still waited. So he stood in silence, like a man between worlds, one foot in the living earth, one in the memory of dreams. From the air beside him came a voice, "Wake, son of Laertes." It was Athena, bright-eyed, her armor faintly aglow though the dawn was pale. She smiled, touching her spear to the ground so lightly that no sound came. "You have endured much, but still one test remains. The halls of your house are filled with men, arrogant suitors who devour your food and seek your wife's hand, thinking you long dead. You must walk unseen until the hour comes to reclaim what is yours." Odysseus bowed his head. "I will obey, goddess. Only guide my heart." She reached out and touched his face. In an instant his skin grew withered, his clothes ragged, his hair gray and matted. To any mortal eye he was now a beggar, bent, weary, forgotten. "Go first," Athena said, "to the hut of Eumaeus, your faithful swineherd. There you will find shelter and a friend whose heart has not changed." Then she vanished like mist on the wind. The hut of Eumaeus. Odysseus walked through the hills of his island, the sun rising slow and red behind him. The paths were narrow and rough, winding through wild olive groves and rocky slopes where goats bleated. At last he saw smoke curling from a small hut beside a pig pen. The scent of firewood drifted in the air. Inside sat Eumaeus, broad-shouldered, kind-eyed, tending the fire. When the beggar entered, Eumaeus looked up but saw only a stranger. Not his king, but a traveler weary from the road. Still, he rose at once and said, "Welcome, friend. The poor must care for the poor. Sit by the fire and eat." He brought bread and wine, laid a cloak upon the bench, and spoke of the suitors with bitterness. They feast all day in the king's hall, wasting his flocks, mocking his servants. Yet I say Odysseus will return, though none believe me. Odysseus smiled faintly. "May your faith be rewarded," he said. That night, as they lay by the fire, the wind moaned around the hut. Eumaeus covered his guest with another cloak, saying, "You will not sleep cold in my house." And Odysseus, moved by his loyalty, whispered softly in the dark, "So faithful a heart shines brighter than any palace." Soft flute, gentle embers crackling. Days passed. Then one morning Telemachus, the son of Odysseus, returned from his voyage seeking word of his father. He came to the hut, and Eumaeus ran to greet him, tears in his eyes. Odysseus watched from the shadows, his heart beating hard. The boy was grown, strong, noble. How many nights had he dreamed of this moment? When at last they were alone, Athena appeared again, unseen by others, and touched Odysseus with her staff. The beggar's form melted away. The gray hair darkened, the shoulders straightened, the eyes burned once more with the fire of kings. Telemachus gasped and stepped back, thinking he saw God. But Odysseus reached out and said, "My son, it is I." For a moment neither spoke. Then they embraced, weeping as the years fell away. "Father," said Telemachus, "you are come at last." "And you," said Odysseus, "are the man I hoped you would be." Together they planned. The suitors would feast one last time. The bow of Odysseus still hung upon the wall, and none had strength to string it. That would be the sign. The hall of the suitors. Low drumbeats, murmurs of feasting, the flicker of torches. In the great hall of Ithaca, the suitors sat at long tables, drinking wine and laughing. Penelope moved among them like a shadow of grace, her face calm though her heart was heavy. Each day she wove a shroud for her father-in-law, and each night she unmade her work, buying time, hoping against hope. That evening, a beggar entered the hall. The suitors mocked him, but Penelope raised her hand. "Let him be," she said. "A traveler's heart may carry truth." She did not know him, yet something in his eyes stirred her soul, as if an old melody whispered through the years. At her command, the bow of Odysseus was brought forth. "This," she said, "shall be the test. Whosoever strings it, and sends an arrow clean through 12 axe heads in a row, shall be my husband." One by one the suitors tried. They grunted, strained, cursed, but the bow would not yield. Then the beggar stepped forward. Laughter filled the hall. "You? With those ragged hands?" But Penelope, silent, watched. Odysseus took the bow, turning it slowly in his palms. He felt its curve, the familiar polish of wood shaped long ago by his own hand. His fingers brushed the string, and then a soft note, clear as a lyre. He bent it once, twice, and it sang to him whole and perfect. He knocked an arrow, lifted it, and loosed. The shaft flashed through all 12 axe heads in a single whisper of air. Then, as silence filled the hall, Odysseus turned, his eyes burning with the light of gods and men, and called to his son, "Now the hour is come." He tore away the rags, stood revealed in his strength, and the suitors cried out in terror, "Odysseus, the king!" The arrows flew swift and sure. None escaped who had shamed his house. When the hall was quiet at last, Odysseus lowered his bow. The air smelled of smoke and justice. Soft harp, the faint call of doves. When all was done, Penelope stood before him. She looked long at the man before her, the lines of his face, the scars upon his hands, and her heart wavered. "If you are truly my lord," she said softly, "tell me one secret only we two share." Odysseus smiled. "Our bed," he said. "It was carved from a living olive tree, rooted deep in the earth. No hand could move it." Then she knew. The veil of years fell away, and she ran to him, crying his name. He caught her, and the world seemed to still around them. The sea breathed softly beyond the walls, and the dawn rose gold across Ithaca. That night, they sat side by side, speaking quietly of all that had passed, of Troy, of the sea, of gods and ghosts and the long road. Home. Outside, the torches flickered low. Within, peace returned at last to the house of Odysseus. Athena looked down from the heights of Olympus and smiled. "So ends the tale of endurance," she whispered. "So ends the wandering of the mortal heart." And over Ithaca the morning came clear and bright. The wind carried the scent of olive and salt. Children laughed in the courtyards. Shepherds called to their flocks, and Penelope laid her hand in her husband's. The war was far away now. The sea was calm. The king had come home. Music fades. Harp and low waves, slowly dissolving into silence. Epilogue, the sea beneath the stars. Soft waves. Night wind over the water. the echo of a distant harp. And now, the journey is over. The storm has passed. The oars are still. The sea rests beneath a blanket of silver light. Odysseus has come home, not only to Ithaca, but to the quiet harbor of his heart. He has faced the wrath of gods, the hunger of monsters, and the long shadow of memory. He has seen the faces of the dead and the grace of the living. He has walked the thin line between dream and waking and found his way by the faintest star. But the truth of his voyage is not only his own. It belongs to all who wander, all who have been lost and long to return. For every traveler carries an Ithaca inside them, a place of peace, of love waiting beyond the horizon, of a light that never truly fades. Perhaps tonight, as you drift toward sleep, you too are sailing through your own vast ocean, the sea of thoughts, of memories, of distant hopes. Let them come and go, like waves upon the sand. Let the stars above your mind burn steady, guiding you home. For even in the quiet darkness, you are never truly alone. The same constellations that watched over the heroes still shimmer above you now. The same winds that carried Odysseus breathe softly at your window. So rest, voyager. Let the tide of dreams take you where it will. Let your heart drift among the islands of memory, where all roads lead home and all storms fall silent. Music fades to a single, distant harp note. The story ends, but the sea goes on. Good night,